Welcome to episode 317 of Angela Watson's Truth for Teachers. I'm your host, Angela Watson, and I'm here to speak encouragement into the hearts of educators and get you informed and energized for the week ahead. Today, I'm talking with Claire English of the Unteachables about a more sustainable approach to behavior management that focuses on what you as the teacher can actually control, your own behavior. Visit truthforteachers.com for an easy-to-read, easy-to-share version of this podcast episode. Today's episode is brought to you in part by ListenWise and their new product designed for newcomers and beginning-level English learners. It's called LingoLift. LingoLift builds the foundational social and academic language that newcomers need. Their large collection of short educational videos teaches content and language together. Unique watch, learn, speak instructional sequences and teacher's guides offer a powerful yet flexible tool for building newcomer skills as quickly as possible. And now, ListenWise has something for students K-12 at every level of English language acquisition. Request a quote and try LingoLift free today at listenwise.com. My guest today is Claire English, whom you might know from her incredible presence on both Instagram and TikTok under the account called The Unteachables. Claire is an experienced Australian secondary English teacher and senior leader. She specializes in supporting students with complex social, emotional, and mental health needs. She's worked in schools across the UK and Australia and is dedicated to transforming volatile, challenging, chaotic learning environments into places of safety and support and learning. Claire has founded the Unteachables Academy and the Low-Level Behaviors Support Club. She's also the author of the book, It's Never Just About the Behavior, from which I took the title for this show. Listen in as Claire shares a fresh and actually sustainable approach to classroom management. So, Claire, a lot of teachers seem to have one of two main problems with the behavior management advice they hear. The first issue is that the advice tends to be trite and simplistic, so it ignores the root issues. And the other common complaint is that behavioral advice places too much onus on the teacher. And it can even feel like it's blaming teachers. Like, if your students are misbehaving, it's because you have poor classroom management or your lessons aren't engaging. And I feel like the advice you give is so aware of these issues and is intentionally different. Can you talk about how you approach student behavior advice?
Absolutely. I am so excited to be having this discussion because this is the stuff that we need to be talking about. This is the stuff that will help teachers feel more empowered. And I guess the way that I teach things is intentionally different because I'm a teacher and I get it. And, like when you're a teacher, I think that so many people who are, giving this advice, it is trite and it is simplistic because most of the people giving advice to teachers don't actually know what it is like to be in a classroom and dealing with these big behaviors and don't understand classroom management itself. Like, I think that there's this massive misconception with what classroom management actually is. And, there's this big push towards a classroom management approach that's less punitive, that's trauma-informed, that's restorative. And I'm sure some of those words actually get people's backs up because I feel like these things have stripped teachers of the only actionable tools that they have in the classroom. And like they've kind of been replaced, these actionable tools have been replaced with kind of concepts and values, which are very important ones and ones that I hold very dear to my own practice. But, teachers who really do want to approach behavior in a more calm, curious and compassionate way are left screaming like, well, what do we actually do? And the response is often, well, you need to just build a relationship or, you need to think about how you're teaching your lessons. You need to have more engaging lessons because the people who are giving that advice don't actually know what the hell is going on with classroom management themselves. Like, I'm sure they have the best of intentions and they want to embody these values for their students as well, but they don't understand what that actually looks like in action, in practice in the classroom. That's why my approach is different. Yes, it's underpinned by neuroscience. It is brain-based. It is restorative. It is trauma-informed, but I focus on the things that teachers can control in their practice and empower teachers to move the needle and, all of those things that happen even before behaviors pop up. And I'm sure that we're going to get into kind of some of those things throughout the chat, but that's what kind of sets it apart. The fact that number one, I'm a teacher. I understand classroom management. I understand behavior, and I get the frustrations of feeling really disempowered in classroom management itself.
Yeah, that totally makes sense, because so much of what you share on Instagram really is about teacher empowerment. It's not just about behavior. You talk a lot about work-life boundaries and taking care of yourself, and not just only focusing on the kids, to realize that you are an important part of the classroom too. So yeah, that definitely resonates.
Yes. Yeah, we are the biggest piece of the puzzle. Like, if we can't take care of ourselves and things aren't okay with us, like, how are we going to go in and do this job that requires so much of us and so much regulation and, so much of our capacity?
Yes. I feel like many teachers feel overwhelmed by the sheer variety of behaviors they encounter. It used to be many years ago that you would have, a handful of really disruptive kids and a handful of minor misbehaviors. And now it seems like those numbers have sort of doubled, or even to the point where many teachers are like, I have more that have issues than don't have issues in terms of paying attention, getting their work done, staying on task, socially appropriate behaviors, and so on. And there's just so much on top of everything that teachers are being asked to do. So how do you recommend that teachers start building a manageable, effective system for their classrooms? What's the basis that they need to begin with?
Yeah, I've heard that as well. I've heard it so often that teachers are, and I've experienced it myself as well, because the type of students that we would be getting in a setting. So I work in a setting for students I used to work, like that was my previous job, but in a setting for students with significant social, emotional, and mental health needs. And the profile of those students has become more extreme over the years because the threshold has changed, because there are so many students who need that additional support. So the ones that actually end up reaching us are like the extreme students, because, things are getting more challenging. Well, obviously I don't have any data to back that up, but anecdotally that does seem like the case, doesn't it? But it needs to be about breaking the cycle somehow, like overwhelm and big behaviors. It leads to us approaching the day-to-day like this giant game of whack-a-mole, where we just feel like we're constantly addressing behaviors and, hitting down the behaviors to be able to actually teach. We can break this cycle in a number of ways, and there are a bunch of different things we can change in our practice, from striking that balance between our credible and approachable teaching presence, to really nailing down our entry and exit routines, to having systems in place for early finishes, because all of these things just are micro moments where there's opportunities for behaviors to kind of spike up. To having nonverbal roadmaps to follow when addressing low-level behaviors in a calm way. But all of those things are proactive and are happening before the behavior pops up. And there are so many things that teachers can start with just to see some success and feel more excited about the potential that things can change, because it kind of gets to a point where things feel really hopeless and helpless and you just don't want to walk back into the classroom again. So it's all about kind of breaking that cycle. And it's coming from this understanding that we can't control the behaviors. We're not in control of the behaviors in the room as much as some people's leaders would like them to be. You do not control any other human being's behaviors. All you can control is your own behaviors and how you respond and what you do. So really starting from that understanding and then putting things in place that can proactively start to mitigate some of these big challenges, because there are lots of things that we can do to start to mitigate, because all of those whack-a-mole behaviors are kind of not leaving space for us to be dealing with like the things that actually need to be dealt with more rigorously, because we're always on those low-level disruptions. And yeah, it all starts with that, and understanding that classroom management has far less to do with the behavior itself than a lot of people like to make out.
Mm-hmm. When you talk about being able to control only yourself, and you mentioned the word your presence in the classroom, I'd love to hear you talk about presence, because I feel like that's a really hard thing to define, and it's different for every teacher. And as a young teacher, I tried to emulate other successful teachers, not realizing that my demeanor doesn't naturally match theirs. My personality wasn't like theirs. So I couldn't do things the way that they did. I had to find what was authentic to me. And then I was able to sustain it. Then it wasn't just like this performance or this act. It was actually, I could do it day after day. And it actually resonated with the kids because they could feel the sincerity in there. So can you speak a little bit to how you have found your presence and what advice you give around that?
Oh, this is one of the things that I talk about the most, actually. I absolutely love this topic. And what you said about us kind of comparing ourselves to the teacher down the hall. Like when I first started teaching, there was this one teacher, she's a really good friend of mine, actually. But she's this really loud, out there, like really energetic person. And I was trying to emulate that, thinking that that would make me more popular with the students or more likable with the students. And it just led to me having far more issues with behavior because of how I was showing up in the classroom. So this is a concept by Michael Grinder. It's called Envoy, and it's all about like the nonverbals that we use in the classroom. This one thing can honestly be like a switch being flicked in the classroom. So we've got these two kind of ways that we can show up in the classroom non-verbally. The first is being credible in our teaching presence, and the second is being approachable in our teaching presence. It's all about balancing those things. So it's not about us being a certain kind of person. It's not about us having to be, more exciting, more fun, more strict. It's not about those things. So it's beautiful because we can just lean into the people that we are and be really authentic and genuine with our students. It's just about being strategic with the nonverbals that we're using when we need to use them. So the times where we're trying to get students to be listening to instructions and teacher-led instructions, we would be more embodying the credible, which is more stillness, more slowness. Our inflection would be different. Our tone would be different. Our proximity to students would be different. The way we're standing, evenly on both feet, our shoulders down, really intentionally embodying this credible body language, really taking that deep breath. But then there are times where we can be more approachable when we're moving from group to group during group work, or when we're having a chat with our students, when we're trying to build that rapport. We're more in our approachable body language, which is more relaxed. We might be leaning on the table. We might be on one foot. We might be, just having a bit of a chat like I'm talking to you right now. This is not how I would talk to my students if I'm trying to get them to follow my instructions. So really thinking about our teaching presence as a tool and a bunch of different nonverbal strategies. It's not about being a different person. It's actually something that every single one of us can learn, because if we don't use these two things in the right way at the right time, it can actually escalate the behaviors in the room. If I'm being approachable in times where I'm supposed to be credible, our students in the room is going to be having a bit of a chit chat, and I'm going to be like, why are you talking? Like, why are you talking over me? Come on, everyone, let's listen. So it's really about choosing the nonverbals that are appropriate for the moment. And that is our teaching presence. It's not about the person we are.
What are some of the common pitfalls that are really easy to fall into with behavior issues?
So I think, and it leads on to what I just said, it's not modeling what we want from our students. It all leads on from those nonverbals, and all leads on from those, like the whole idea of the credible and the approachable, and how we need to strategically be with our students. And one of the most important tools that we have in our bag of tricks for behavior is our own regulation. And I use this analogy of our class being an orchestra, and we're the conductor of the energy in the room, and all of the music the class is playing is just to the tune of their own emotional regulation. And it's our job as the conductor to then lead and guide that as much as we can from what is in our control, which is often our nonverbals and our structures and all of the things that are, happening outside of those behaviors. And that is our baton. Our nonverbals are our baton, all of those wonderful things that we can do in our control. And a big pivot for teachers, and it's something that has an immediate impact on how we're responding to behaviors and the behaviors themselves, is just modeling what we want to see in the room. So I spoke a lot about the credible and the approachable. The best way to remember how to do that is just by asking yourself, what do I want to see from my students right now, and how can I embody that? So if I want my students to be calm and sitting in the seat and listening and, really attentive, how do I need to embody that in my nonverbals to be able to regulate them into what I'd like them to be doing right now? If we're expecting students to be listening to teacher input and we're giving students a big wad of sheets to take one and pass one along, the attention's no longer on us. And that's something that I see. You know, I've observed hundreds and hundreds of classes over my career. And that is one of the big things that I see, little things like that actually do add up to some disruption. So take one, pass one along. Well, all of a sudden, the attention isn't on you and you've given a distraction for students to be doing, and that's nonverbal permission for them not to be listening to you. You know, if we want students to be working independently on a task, but then all of a sudden we're going, hey, Barry, you know, what are you doing over there? Put your phone away, instead of moving really quietly, really calmly and using our proximity to redirect that student. We need to be embodying what we want to see from the class. So if you want calm, you need to be modeling that. If you want students to be moving around the room slowly, you need to be modeling that. You want students to be paying attention, but you're pacing and you're talking over them and you think near enough is good enough because Bobby's the only one still having a chat in the corner, but you just need to get through the work and the content. You know, everything we do is sending nonverbal messages to our students. So we just need to be like sending the right messages and using those right nonverbals at the right times. And that is just so powerful of a pivot when we start to realize that we just need to start embodying what we want to see for our students.
What do you do in that moment where it's just really hard to be regulated, where it's like, you know what you need to embody, but it's like, I just want to yell across the room to this kid because I can't believe they're doing it again. Do you explicitly model that for kids and say, I'm feeling really frustrated right now, and then show them what you're doing to calm yourself down? Or how do you handle that?
I think in situations where I'm trying to regulate the behavior in the room, I won't talk through that stuff. I think it's really important for us to be able to teach and model emotional regulation. So to say if I'm running in from, you know, having a really tough day, I might say to them, hi class, I've had a really tough morning. I'm feeling really stressed. Before I'm able to teach this lesson, I'm going to take a couple of deep breaths and drop my shoulders, and then we're going to move on with the lesson. Because if I do the lesson the way that I'm feeling right now, I might not be responding to things. So there is a time and a place for that kind of modeling. When I'm trying to get students to be listening to me and my instructions, I won't be modeling that necessarily. I'll just be I'll just be trying my best to stay regulated. And it is hard. It's really triggering. So before I walk into every single lesson, I'll say to myself, all I can control is myself. I will be telling myself that about 50 times a day. If I'm in the middle of a lesson where I've got 5 students and they're really bubbling things up and I've been waiting for 3 minutes and I'm like, I just need to get through this lesson, I will tell myself, I can only control what I can control, and all I can control right now is myself. So what can I do in this moment? I can take a deep breath, I can drop my shoulders, and it's going to be different for everybody, but I find it really helpful to take a deep breath in and really consciously think about where my shoulders are. Because for me, I feel like I get really tense and I'm like this, and everyone's going to be different in that. So I'll like have my shoulders up near my ears and I'll be really tense. So just the act of me recognizing what's happening in my body, recognizing that I am feeling very stressed and I'm not okay, taking a deep breath and then intentionally dropping my shoulders, even just that, looking out into the classroom, you can see that act as a wave of regulation. When I started to learn these strategies, I'm like, this is a bit of magic. I just can't believe, I can't believe this is working, because, you know, I was being very punitive in my approach. I was doing a lot of shouting, a lot of crosses on the board, and I was very power over. When I started to adopt these things, I couldn't believe how magical it was just to be able to start to influence rather than try to control, just through my regulation, and just acknowledging that that is tough. And, you know, all of the teachers that I work with, they come to me like about how difficult they're finding regulation. But then when you start to work on that and when you start to realize how powerful that is, it can be like night and day.
Yes. Self-regulation is everything. And it took me, obviously I'm still working on it. I think it's a lifelong thing, but it took me so many years to figure that out and to understand that who I am apart from being in the classroom has such a major impact on how I show up, and the way that I take care of myself outside of work spills over, and the types of practices that I do, you know, learning to practice self-compassion, learning how to self-regulate in, you know, in traffic or when my husband's getting on my nerves or something, you know, all of these are skills that you build, and the more you do it, the easier it becomes. But I'd love to hear about what you do outside of the classroom that helps you stay regulated when you're in the classroom.
Oh, I love that. And I completely agree. It's a skill that we're constantly trying to learn and master. Like when I was pregnant and I was in the classroom with students who like very volatile, violent behaviors, it was very hard to stay regulated. And I think every day now with my toddler, I'm always trying to practice those skills of regulation. I spoke to the wonderful Marie Gentles on my podcast a little while back, and she used this term emotional containment. And I have used that ever since because I think it's so beautiful. It's about finding something, because I'm a busy mum. I don't have time to do anything. She sleeps with me, like I don't have even time to get up in the morning and do anything. So just something to practice emotional containment where you're spending even just 5 minutes on something that is just about you. My thing is I need to just spend 5 minutes after school, after teaching, to have a cup of tea in the bedroom. I say to my husband, I'm going in there now. Like, I'm having my time. I just need to sit there. I can't be spoken to. I can't hear it, I just need to have time by myself. And if I don't have that, I really, really struggle with overwhelm. I have gone through big bouts of burnout myself. So that just time for me to be able to decompress is so important. And I know that, again, everyone's so different. Like, some people might want to go and play a sport or go to the gym or go for a walk, like it's just whatever works for you. For me, it's sitting in a dark room and not speaking to anybody, but it's just about what works for you.
Yeah. Even that 5 minutes, it really makes a difference. I always feel like, I need a longer block of time for self-care. I wish I could just have an entire weekend in which no one's asking me to do anything or whatever. But honestly, even just 5 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, whatever small bits of time make a huge difference. And it's interesting because I interviewed a teacher a long time ago who has 7 children of her own. And she has trained them that when she comes home, the first 30 minutes, she's going to be in the bedroom by herself. And the older ones watch the younger ones, and they have their own little routine of whatever it is they do down there. And they know, do not come upstairs and bother mom. She has been teaching all day long, and now she's got 7 kids at home. And that's just a routine that she's established. She was like, it is my sanity. And they know that. They've seen me on days when I don't get that and I'm not as well regulated. So I think it's a normal need. And it's something that the more that we honor that, I think the better we're going to be for the people around us.
Oh my gosh, 7 kids. Oh my gosh. I'm struggling with one toddler.
Yeah, I know. I can't imagine.
Oh my gosh.
So let's get into some of these behaviors, because you've had experience with more severe behaviors. One of your guiding principles is focused on understanding the why behind the behavior. How do teachers address the root causes of behavior while managing the day-to-day disruptions and teaching their lessons and staying on top of everything that needs to be done? You can't just stop and, dig into a kid's, the deepest issues right in the middle of your lesson. How do you balance those two things?
Oh, I love that question, because when we hear that we need to understand the why beneath the behavior, that is exactly what teachers can think, and that's how it gets misconstrued, or maybe even that's how they're being taught to think about the why, that they need to stop and, what's going on, like what's happening beneath the behavior. That's not the case. Like, the student probably doesn't even understand what's going on beneath their behavior. Like, it's very, very likely they have no idea what is going on beneath the behavior. And also there's an understanding around it that is excusing the behavior, which is not the case at all, because what's happening in the brain is happening with all of us. And that's really powerful to understand. When we understand the basic function of the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala and all of those things in the stress response, we're able to approach things in a way that actively de-escalates what's in front of us. So for me, understanding the why is just about allowing us to see what's happening in front of us and respond in a way that's going to de-escalate, because it's all about de-escalation. So this understanding really just allows us to kind of get to the root causes, and all of our pedagogy and all of the teaching and learning and stuff that we do, it should just be about, being preventative to all of those things. When we understand the why beneath the behavior, we understand why that works. And it just helps us to be more intentional in the way that we respond to behavior, because we're then having a better chance of keeping ourselves regulated when we're like, okay, what I see in front of me is likely a stress response. And if I would like to start to address that stress response, I need to stay regulated and bring them into my calm. So it's not about us having 20 conversations an hour about what's happening beneath the behavior. That's not the case at all, although there is obviously a time and place for that for the more extreme cases. I think we get stuck in a cycle of feeling like we have to have all of these restorative chats because we've got a restorative model. No, that's not the case. Like, we need to be having time for the more extreme cases, but knowing that that's not necessary for every single behavior. But it's about using this information to really inform and strengthen what we do in the day-to-day. So, for example, I know that when I scaffold my essay writing tasks and I provide supports like sentence starters and, all of those lovely things, I know that there's going to be less likelihood of Bobby going, oh, this is crap, I'm not doing it, and throwing his book against the wall, because he'll feel more supported in doing that. So it's about understanding what can I put in place, like those structures, like those supports, like those routines, that will mitigate some of those whys beneath the behavior, like thinking about the needs and all of the things that we don't have to know what's happening with every single student. We just need to know that it's potentially happening and put things in place that are proactive. That's my thought on the why beneath the behavior. And I am a big fan of knowing the why beneath the behavior. It's a big foundation for me. But, oh my gosh, could you imagine if we had to find out what was going on with every student? They don't know.
Yes, that's right. They can't articulate it. And then you're like,
yeah.
Why are you doing that? What is wrong with you today? Why aren't you working? I don't know. Or they say something, they truly cannot tell you. So when you start going into these why are you questions, you're not going to get anywhere, And I think what you've said about it being more focused on the proactive response and thinking about what we know about neuroscience and stress responses, rather than playing psychological trauma detective, where it's like, okay, what's going on in this kid's home life, and trying to dig it all up. That's not the role of a teacher necessarily. It's not something that you have to do in order to be able to understand the student. It might be, okay, this child is having a stress response. I don't necessarily know why. I don't know what triggered it, but I know how to respond to these kinds of things. I can see what's happening in this moment. And I know, from neuroscience-based, brain-based ways of responding to behavior, of how to respond to that.
That's so powerful. And, I hear a lot of like, oh, we're not psychologists and we don't have training to deal with this stuff. We don't have to be. We actually just have to be really great teachers, which is the most empowering thing about an approach to behavior like this, because we just have to have really good practice, control what we can control, know how to respond to things in a certain strategic way. But it's not about fixing any, you don't have to go in and try to fix the world's problems with our students. It's just about being a fantastic present teacher, which is really empowering for people who think that they have to go in, and a trauma-informed approach means that they have to understand the ins and outs of everybody's life.
Mm-hmm. That's really powerful for me personally, because I am a fixer, and I am a person who carries the weight of the world on my shoulders. And when something is wrong, it doesn't matter how big of a problem it is and how much beyond me it is, I still feel like I should do something. And when I have a student who is clearly suffering, and going through things, I want to fix it. And so it's really hard for me to not do that deep dive and to not make that my mission. And I really love what you're saying here. It really is a profound shift to think about. It is not my job to fix. I'm going to set this student up for success, and then I'm going to respond in the moment to what they need in the moment. And that's my job. And I know how to do that. That's what I've been trained to do. That's what I'm good at.
Yeah. And that's the way that we can kind of like leave things. And I'm with you completely. And I think that's why I got so burnt out when I was first teaching. And it's such an important shift, because then we can leave it at the door. I think it's so important to be able to leave it at the door. And I think that a lot of the people I work with, they're really compassionate, kind, empathetic teachers, and taking so much of that on themselves. All you can control is what you can control. You can't control what happens when they leave that classroom. And yeah, it's a really important shift to be making.
What advice would you give to teachers who are working with students who have severe or really persistent behavior challenges? Can you talk more about that burnout piece and the emotional exhaustion that comes when you work with students who require really intensive behavior support?
Absolutely. So I think I said before that I originally I taught in a mainstream school to begin with, and then more recently and it was still a low socioeconomic school. There's still a lot of instances of behavior challenges, but there was kind of some respite from that. I had some classes that were a little bit easier to manage. And like there was still a little bit of respite. But then when I moved to London, I stepped into this school for students specifically with social, emotional, and mental health needs, like very complex needs. And that manifested in really big behaviors, really volatile, really violent, really abusive, the whole shebang. And I think I said it before, but I just would walk into every single lesson saying to myself and trying to remember every single second I was working with these students that I can only control what I can control. And another really helpful thing to know about students who exhibit these really big behaviors is that behavior change doesn't happen overnight. And it can be really disheartening to work with students who have these big behaviors and we're trying really hard and we're investing in their emotional piggy banks and, we're really trying to develop a rapport and, we're following the advice that we just need to build a relationship, and they're not coming on board with that, because if students have these social, emotional and mental health needs, it's likely that their ability to trust has been completely eroded throughout their lives. So it's really important to remind yourself that their attachment style, and these students would often have a disorganized attachment style, which would be the style that would manifest in all of those really big behaviors. That didn't happen overnight. That was crafted. Their brain has been crafted by their entire life's worth of connection points, which helps us to be a little bit more empathetic to the student as well if we're having a tough time, because we are human. And there have been times in my career where I'm like, I just don't want that student in my class. I don't want to be treated like this anymore. I don't want to deal with this anymore. And I have wanted to push away, and it does help us to remember that the way they're presenting in class is a product of everything they've, gone through in their lives. And we can't undo that in a day, in a month, in a year. We can start to make steps towards that. Give yourself grace and know that every single moment of connection that you are making with that student is actually changing their brain. Like, we are actually creating, because even though their attachment is their attachment, every time we show them compassion, kindness, we learn compassion and kindness and respect and all of these things through being modeled those things to us. And if students aren't modeling that, like if they're not showing that to you, it's likely because they haven't been shown that in their lives. So every time you do choose a path where you're showing them that way of being, you're actually creating new connections in their brain. And you can't see that happening. I heard this really beautiful analogy. And if anybody has any understanding of where this came from, let me know. But I think I heard in a training many, many, many years ago. But when we work with students with challenging behaviors, they have this highway to the behavior, to a way of being, to a response, and they are on that one-track highway. When we're working with students and we're trying to redirect those behaviors, what we're doing is we're trying to completely create a new path off that highway. So maybe for the first month, we're going through and pulling out some weeds off the highway. Maybe they go, people are going down this way. Maybe I'll mow this area, and there's another little pathway that they can take to get to this result, and they don't have to use this behavior. Maybe then the council comes in and goes, hey, this is being used a lot, this pathway. Maybe I'm going to put some tarmac down on it. So over time in their brain, what used to be their highway to a certain behavior to meet this need, we're actually crafting this different path and this different way of being and responding. That does not take, getting the council to put in a new highway is not going to happen overnight. So it's just thinking this new pathway is something that needs to be forged and needs to be practiced and needs to be trodden down over time. And I hope I haven't absolutely demolished that analogy, but it's something that has stuck with me ever since. And I just love it so much.
Yeah, I really like that. I can visualize that too. It's just, that's the path they're just naturally speeding down. They've been down it so many times and you're showing them a different way. And the really cool thing is that, our brains learn to respond to different situations in different ways. So even if this more kinder, gentler, empathetic way of being isn't going to allow them to be successful, let's say in a home environment, because it may not serve them. They may need to be tougher, meaner, whatever in those kinds of environments. The brain has different neural pathways for different situations. And over time, the student can learn, in this room, this is how I need to show up. This is what requires me to be successful in this room. And in this room, I'm safe to be more vulnerable or to take a risk. So I love that idea of when you're working with the most extreme behaviors to feel like You can't fix it. You're only going to control what you can control. But every single day, you are helping that student create new neural pathways and healthier responses. That's empowering.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it is. And I think those are the kind of things that over time have made me kind of craft this approach, because it also doesn't look like, so when we're talking about crafting those new neural pathways, it also doesn't look like us sitting down with a student every single time and going, okay, this is how we need to respond differently. It can literally be through, hey, I'm going into this class today and I know that Miss English has a starter activity ready for me. And that is supporting their own regulation and just reminding them that those things are going to be happening. It's the tiny micro moments of connection that we make with them to help them to build trust in other human beings where maybe they don't have trust in other human beings. It's just these small things that we can do. I've had students that I've taught that in a year I haven't had any success with. But then in 5 years down the track, I've seen the evidence of the work that I've done. Oh, I'm never going to thanks for that. I need to thanks for that. But, like we don't realize how much impact we're having because it's not something that we see. And that can be really tough for us as teachers.
Mm-hmm. What advice do you give to teachers whose schools don't have a unified approach to student behavior? So these are the folks who feel like they are left to handle all the most challenging problems on their own. There's no one else supporting them. They send the kids to the office. They send them right back with a lollipop, that whole scenario. The ministers may be too soft on kids in the teacher's mind. They feel like the kids need a firmer hand, or, they kind of feel like they've been dumped alone in a classroom with a student and no support for the student, no support for them.
Yeah. And this is something that comes up a lot in my work. And especially when I'm posting on Instagram and I'm hearing people who aren't necessarily in my sphere that kind of reach my work. First up, you deserve to be supported by your leadership, and you deserve to be heard in the challenges that you're having in the classroom, and you deserve to be validated and all of the things. But often the support that teachers want is not the support that they need. And I think that there's a lot of disempowerment in the classroom and they need something to help them to fix that. But a firmer hand with leadership isn't going to necessarily help them, because if you want, your leadership to take them out and expel them, it's going to do nothing to change the behavior when they come back into the room. And I hear this time and time again from teachers that I support. They've gone out, they've had some kind of chat with, with the principal, and they've come back and there's no discussion with the teacher. There's no communication about what happened outside of that room. And it does appear like it's just been brushed over, let's get him back to the room. And then the student doesn't see the teacher as a leader of that space because they've just been sent to the principal who's given them a lollipop and been sent back to class with no communication with the teacher. And it's so disempowering for us, and the problems then compound and deepen and the behaviors escalate. And it's like, well, you'll just send me out anyway. So there's all of these layers to whatever's happening in that situation. And there are so many issues in schools like this that I can't control and that, are so contextual and so nuanced to that specific school, which is why I am all about controlling the controllable and teaching teachers to control what they can control. You can't control the leadership's response to that student unless you go to another school. You have to leave. If you don't like the environment that you're in a school and it's really not serving you and you feel really disempowered by that, you can't change that, so really focus on the things that you can control. So, what can you do to strengthen your community? How can your classroom be an island of safety for those students? We can't control what leadership do, and it can be very, very challenging for us. And I've been in a situation where I've walked in the gate every single day going, oh, not again. I don't want to do this again because I feel so unsupported and so unseen and so unheard. And they've just chucked me in here with the toughest kids in the school because they think I can handle it. And every single freaking day, I'm trying to send him out or I'm trying to get someone in here and nothing is changing and it's getting harder and harder and harder. But it was only when I went, you know what? Stuff it. This is my space. These are my kids. And remember, I'm a secondary teacher, so I've got 220 of them. I don't see them every single day, all day. So it was a big, long journey, but this is my community and I need to do what I can control in this space to make things better. And I'm not saying don't seek support. You need support for these challenging behaviors, but I just want you to have the right support. And as I said before, I think that when you're really stuck in this cycle with challenging behaviors, the support that you want necessarily isn't the support that you need. And I wish I could go in there and tell your principal, tell your head teacher how to support you, but I can't. But that's my 2 cents on it, really trying to craft your own island of safety.